Welcome to Human Potential at Work, the show where we explore social impact, inclusion, and empowerment of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Get ready to be inspired, hear success stories, and learn tips and principles for bringing out the best in everyone. And now, here's your host and CEO of Rue Global Impact, Deborah Rue.
Hello, everyone. I am Deborah Rue, and today on Human Potential at Work, we're going to talk to Meghan McLean and she's part of the Special Olympics. And I'm a huge fan, like I know many of you are, of the Special Olympics, and I'm really looking forward to talking to her about what she's up to and what a lot of swimming and baseball. I'm trying to think. We were heavily engaged in Special Olympics because it's such a beautiful program, and there's so much that is good for society about Special Olympics. So I just love what Special Olympics does. But Meghan, tell us how you got to be in this position. It's a very interesting position to be in. 19 different events. That's a huge deal.
Yes. And my path to get here was, when I look back on it, the dots all connect. But when I was going through it, which I think happens for a lot of people, it feels like you're bouncing all over the place. But I guess it starts just with my love for sport. I played sports my whole life, all the way through college. And when I entered college at the University of Delaware, I chose the major of sport management because it seemed like the best way to stay connected through sport and make a career out of it, since being a professional athlete probably wasn't on the horizon for me. It seemed to be the best way to stay connected. And I was in that major for about a year and a half, and I had a teammate on my college team who has a sister who has pretty severe disabilities. And she invited me to volunteer at her sister's adult day training center. And honestly, one day of volunteering there was all it took for me. And really growing up, I didn't have a ton of interaction with people with intellectual disabilities. It just wasn't something that I had the opportunity to do. So after that single day of volunteering, that was a weekend, I actually went to my academic advisor and shifted gears and focused on special education after that point, with the intention of teaching. I planned on being a special education teacher and graduated with that degree and decided that I didn't love teaching. So I was a little lost for a while, ended up working in the WNBA for a little bit. And then through those experiences, actually was connected with the Special Olympics and talked to a couple people there and asked what jobs were open. And there happened to be a job in Florida. And I was at Chicago in the time, had only visited Florida once before. But I applied to be the manager of sport training and competition for Special Olympics Florida. And I was offered that position about 8 years ago now, accepted that, and then came to Florida, where I've been for the past 8 years, and I had a few different positions with the local chapter of Special Olympics Florida. And then in 2017, we decided as a state organization to put in a bid to host the 2022 USA Games. And long story short, we won that bid. And through that process, I actually was offered this position that I'm in now, the Senior Vice President of Sports for the local organizing committee. And at the beginning of 2020, I transitioned into this role, where I've been since then and will be until our event is complete in 2022.
That is such an interesting story. And by the way, we desperately need our allies and our accomplices. It's interesting. I'm 60 and thinking about my journey. Like you said, it is not a straight line. It's this and that. And you're like, oh, okay. And then you look back and you're like, oh, okay. All right. So I think if nothing else, 2020 has taught me that I have no control of anything. But what are the U.S. Games? I do know, but will you just explain it a little bit? I know it's a really big deal. I also want to make a comment that it's really taken seriously. So once again, I mentioned that my daughter was an athlete, and we've always been supportive of the Special Olympics, but it's different with the games. You really have to be the best of the best. And if we continue that same tradition with the Special Olympics, so if you are in the National Special Olympics or the USA Games, it's a big deal. So I will say my daughter didn't get in them because some other athletes, she wasn't applying herself either. But I just want to make that note because I think sometimes people don't realize these are truly athletes.
Yeah. And thank you for saying that. And it's one of the biggest objectives of my team, the sports team, is to change that perception a little bit of people who are connected with the organization understand that it truly is a sport organization with athletes, real athletes, but those who may not have had as much exposure don't understand it to be that way and think it's more a lot of fun, smiles, and right. Just a feel-good organization. Which,
yes. Oh, that's so sweet that he waited. Yeah, but
exactly. And
not more to it than that.
Exactly. And all of that comes organically, but it starts with sport and competition. So the USA Games really for these athletes is the top level of competition other than World Games, which a very small fraction of the athletes advance to the World Games level. So these are athletes who have been training in some cases for years for this opportunity, athletes who have had the opportunity before and are returning to the USA Games again to try to beat their record or try to get a gold medal because they had no medal or maybe silver or bronze previous. So it really is a true sport organization. And as a sports department, our job is to create that environment so that our athletes, first and foremost, feel like athletes. So they get the same treatment that a professional athlete would receive. Coach buses transporting them from the venues, an Olympic village for them to lodge and dine and meet other athletes from other countries. And really a big focus for us has been finding state-of-the-art sport venues. So we have venues where combined Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NFL, Major League Soccer, Olympic swimming events, all of those things have taken place in our venues. These venues were sufficient for that level, and it's the only thing then that is sufficient for our athletes. And the other piece of that,
love it.
And the other piece of it too, so first it's about the athletes, but the other is about the community who is maybe being exposed to the organization for the first time. We want them to walk into any of these competitions and understand immediately that this is true competition, to see that our athletes have the same services, that the level of guest experience and athlete experience is the same that it would be if they were to go to any professional or Division I college sporting event.
Yeah, and that is just so important because I still think people are confused about the level. I know just as a family and my daughter that sometimes I remember my daughter got to the point that, because keep in mind, this is sports. And just because not everybody can be the pitcher, not everybody can be first base, but I remember my daughter wasn't really applying herself and she didn't make the Special Olympics baseball team, because she wasn't really committed to it. And that was just our local team. So I realized that Special Olympics, I think I also had that misunderstanding that, like, my daughter was also involved in another league. And it was just a little local league in my community. And what happened was she wasn't applying herself as Special Olympics. So this became a little rec league that if she showed up, if she bothered to bat, if she wasn't listening to her music. But dispelling those things, I think, are really important, and really understanding these are athletes. They train like athletes. They eat like athletes. They have sports coaches like you that have a lot of experience. This is very serious. And yes, we can get inspired from this, but Special Olympics is not inspirational porn. This is a very serious sporting organization. And so I just love it. And I think it's just so important. I would also say that sometimes I see people getting confused because my organization has also worked with the International Paralympics and the American Paralympics. We're helping them rebrand right now. And I think sometimes people get confused about the Paralympics versus Special Olympics. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering, I didn't warn you about this question, but do you mind just talking about that a little? Because I think I understand, but I might not completely.
Yeah, no, that's another really common misconception. And people that I talk to when I talk about what I do, I think their first thought a lot of times when I say Special Olympics is people who have physical disabilities. So they're asking about wheelchair basketball and some of the other things that you might see. But Special Olympics is the qualification to compete in Special Olympics is to have an intellectual disability. Now, some of our athletes also have physical disabilities, but that is the qualifying factor. But something that's really cool about Special Olympics is the Unified Sports Program. And what this does is it's competition for people with intellectual disabilities and those without, that we call unified partners, to compete with each other against other unified teams. What it really does is gives our athletes the opportunity to make friends, have social interactions with people who don't have intellectual disabilities. So it's really a better model of what society is really, rather than just our athletes competing and hanging out with just other people with intellectual disabilities. And what I think is really cool about that is that allows someone who maybe doesn't have an intellectual disability but has a physical disability to come into our organization and participate, have a place, and compete. So we offer competition and participation to all people, which honestly, in my previous position at Special Olympics Florida, I did a lot of onboarding new athletes and their families. And to this day, probably the best thing I've done with this organization, or my favorite part of it, I should say, is that no matter who called, I answered the phone. It might be a parent. There was literally no situation where I said, your child doesn't have a place here. If they had an intellectual disability, they had a place. And parents would tell me, my child's not that coordinated, they're not that athletic. We have bowling, we have bocce, we have walking events on the track. So there's always something that athletes can do just to get their foot in the door. And then the other side of that is parents who are just trying to find a place for their child to participate. They call, I'd like my high schooler to volunteer with Special Olympics. And by the end of the conversation, they're volunteering by participating and being a part of the organization. So that's a really cool part of it, is that I've literally never had to tell someone there's nothing for you here, which is just a really good feeling.
It is. And I remember we were really blessed, my daughter and I, to meet Eunice Shriver. And I remember I was so honored to meet her. It was a couple of years before she passed, but she's created something so beautiful and amazing here. And she was part of the Kennedy family, and it has absolutely been a family commitment over the years. But why, Meghan, and I will just say this, one reason why I got involved, why I wanted Sarah involved in Special Olympics when she was, growing up, was I wanted her to be socialized. I wanted her to be around community. I did not play sports when I was a young girl. My family encouraged us to be musicians. They didn't encourage us to play sports. I really wish I had been encouraged to play sports because I love to exercise. I'm one of those weird, but I really enjoy it. I like how I feel, but the team part of it, I was not as exposed to, I think. That's something I think I would have benefited from being exposed to. So as a mother, I really wanted my children. And I have two children. I have my daughter with Down syndrome and then her brother. And you made a comment that reminded me of something her brother said. Whenever they were just starting, middle school is so hard anyway. I remember they had a middle school dance around, I don't know, one of the holidays. And it was the Christmas holiday. So they had a middle school dance. And then we also had a dance where it was a group of intellectual disabled adults. So the adults had special needs. And my son went to the dance at the school, and the boys were on one side, the girls were on the other, very little dancing, very awkward. And then he went to this other dance where everybody didn't care what they looked like or how they were dancing. And he said, Mama, I like this dance so much better than because there was joy in this dance. So these are just my experiences, but why do you think it's so important for these individuals to be involved with sports and the community to understand the involvement and what it means to them?
Yeah, I think to your point, the team aspect, just a lot of these students and athletes that come to our organization in other places feel excluded. I think as a society, we've come a really long way, but that is definitely still there. And we give them this team of people who have chosen to be there, coaches who are taking time out of their day, who, by the way, our coaches have full-time jobs and are spending their nights and weekends doing this. Everybody that's there has chosen to be there and is completely entering the space with the lens of complete inclusion. So I think that aspect is just so important for our athletes to be able to develop those social skills in a place where they know that it's safe and that they feel really comfortable. And what I think is really cool about what's happening with the movement is that before Special Olympics was a place where people with intellectual disabilities went to develop skills to go out into the quote unquote real world. And what's happening now is that line of this is Special Olympics and the real world is over here across this line is just being blurred. And honestly, what I think we're trying to do with Special Olympics is to erase it completely and have people understand that this space where people with intellectual disabilities are is the real world. And instead of preparing our athletes to cross the line into the real world, we want to erase that line and bring people into our world. And we're seeing it. And honestly, that's the legacy piece of our event. What we're trying to do is Central Florida has really been seen as a really inclusive city, the city of Orlando especially. We saw it a lot after the Pulse tragedy occurred a few years ago, and we really saw the community come together with a lens of inclusion, and we want to have that same reaction minus the tragedy. We want to use something really positive and good to have people understand what our athletes can do. And just if there's anybody there who needs an example to understand how real our athletes are, we actually have an athlete in Florida. His name's Chris Nikic. He has Down syndrome. And he just recently became the first person with Down syndrome to complete a full Ironman, which...
Wow. Oh, I read about him.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. Cool. It's just under 17 hours of constant physical activity in an open water swim, biking, and running. He's training now for the Ironman Championships in Kona, and he'll be at our event. And he's just inspired so many people, and I think not necessarily the people with the disabilities, but the people around them that support them to really stretch their idea of what our athletes are capable of.
I agree. It's just rethinking society. It's rethinking, and y'all have always been good about that. And we've been involved with a lot of organizations based on the work that I do, but also really wanting my daughter to be included. And I always found every single time that I was involved with Special Olympics, it was a very positive experience for my daughter, for my husband, for my son, and for myself and my friends. And the pride that people displayed when they got there, the joy. Oh, we need more of that. We need much more of that.
We do.
So, Megan, you mentioned that there's 19 events. And I was just wondering if that might not be the right word, events, but there are 19 games, or once again, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Do you mind giving us some examples of what you're talking about? You've talked about it a little bit, but what are some examples of those?
So it's 19 sports, and within those sports, there's a ton of events. So we really have a lot of those sports that you think of when you think of the Olympics. It's track and field, swimming, the team sports, basketball, soccer, all of those are included. And within track and field, everything from the 10K to walking events for some of our athletes who that is the event that they choose. And then we have some really unique events that are really beloved in Florida. So stand-up paddleboard will be offered for the second time. It was offered in 2018 in Seattle. It will be offered again. And we actually are doing an exhibition of surfing that will take place at a wave pool. So we'll have athletes in a wave pool surfing. So the athletes have the ability to choose one sport. And that's another thing to your point earlier about how intense the training is for this. Athletes don't come and pick 3 different sports within the 19. They're really specialized in a specific sport. And then within that sport can choose, in most cases, up to 4 events. So at the track, they could choose the 100 meter, 200 meter, a field event, and a relay. So they'll be competing over a week. They'll be in market for about 10 days, and they will have a very grand opening ceremony to kick off the festivities, and then they will get right into competition mode and compete for 5 or 6 days and have their medal ceremonies and close the week out with a closing ceremony.
And I know you're working so hard to get there, but I'm so excited for you. So what will you consider a success when you look back at these games? What is Megan going to consider a success?
Yeah, I think as an organization, we talk about that all the time. And there's obviously the very measurable things that we have on paper that at the end of this, we can look back and say, did we meet these goals? But for me, it's a little bit less tangible. And I think it's a feeling that we'll have if we know we were successful. And that is that we had 4,300 athletes come to Central Florida and first have the most incredible experience of their lives. A lot of these athletes, and this is true for every USA Games, have never left their home state. We had an athlete that went to Seattle in 2018 from Florida who had never left his home county. He had never been outside the county lines, got on a plane, flew to Seattle, competed on a national stage. So we are trying to build a platform for our athletes to shine. So success for me will be, from an event standpoint, nobody sees what's happening in the background. It's just everywhere you look, it's athletes on a platform, succeeding, striving, maybe failing, because that happens at every sport event, but getting those experiences that come through sport. And then the other piece of it is just, we'll know a little bit after the event how the community has responded based on how many athletes are joining Special Olympics Florida, because that's a really big piece of it. Is there's Special Olympics Florida is serving over 60,000 athletes now, and that's just a fraction of the people with intellectual disabilities in the state who could be served. Now, obviously, there's some people who know about the organization, and those people have intellectual disabilities but just aren't interested in sport, which is obviously probably a good chunk of those. But we know there's so many people that we're not reaching, and then just volunteer support continuing on past the games.
I agree. And I think also making sure the community gets behind and become sponsors, sponsor the athletes, and even though Special Olympics has been around a really long time, I'm speaking for my part of the community, we love Special Olympics. And I'm not going to go into other organizations, but there are other organizations that they say they support us that I don't see the same level of commitment. I've just seen commitment all over the world with Special Olympics. I used to travel a lot before COVID, I would see Special Olympics everywhere. I remember when we went to Macau, China. We went there with the Special Olympics, and they were doing golf. And my daughter wanted to get right in there. She's never played golf, and they're like, this is serious here. Yeah. So you have to actually know, because my daughter's she's used to being invited to participate whether she got ready for it or not. Mm-hmm. And they're like, this is serious. So it was a good experience for her. Mm-hmm. No, you actually have to practice. But so how are y'all doing? Are you getting a lot of sponsorships? Are corporations stepping up and really helping y'all? Could we do more? How can we help more with that part of it?
Yeah, our development team has done an outstanding job. And honestly, a year plus a few months ago, we weren't sure how things were going to go from a fundraising perspective because we were all staring down the neck of COVID and not sure. And the way that they were able to pivot and change their strategy to meet what was happening in the world was just incredible. And they've done a really good job. They're really focused on a lot of legacy sponsors. So sponsors who will continue, not just give to this event, because Special Olympics, the USA Games has a really big platform. There's ESPN coverage. Typically the opening ceremony is broadcast live. So I think it's a little bit of an easier give for a corporation because they're going to get so much awareness in return. The harder thing is to continue to support Special Olympics Florida or the local state chapters after that, because that's happening all year and it's relentless in the support. That we actually just launched something on our website called the 2022 Club, and it's more of an individual giving or a small corporate giving page, and it's at our website. It's called the 2022 Club, and that's SpecialOlympicsUSAGames.org. And that's a way for people at different levels to donate. And honestly, a big chunk of that money goes back to the athletes in the program. And it's giving athletes, beyond just coming here and having really good sport experiences, it's special events that we will be able to invite their families to go to a Disney theme park, which for some people is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. But to get to do it with 4,300 other athletes from across the country and their families will just be absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why it's so important to get behind you. I know that you just mentioned the website, mm-hmm. and you mentioned, is it a hashtag 2022 club?
There's a tab on the website that says donate, right, cool. And it'll take you to the 2022 club page.
So do that, everyone. And then
please.
Let's get behind the Special Olympics and help them turn up the volume of the game on social media. So Megan, why don't you tell everybody, you already mentioned the website, maybe you could mention again, but how they can get involved, what they could do, and how to find y'all, how to Special Olympics, give all the deets.
Yeah. So following on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook at 2022 USA Games, will be huge, because that's another big piece of this is just awareness. We want to make a really big splash with these games and have people involved at a higher level than ever before. So following is one thing, but engaging. And I promise that you'll get a lot out of that, because the stories that we share are very athlete centered. So it will be a lot of times the best part of your day. We actually just got through our 1 year out campaign, and we did a few specials on athletes who found out they were attending USA Games, surprises. So Robin Roberts surprised an athlete on Good Morning America, and Ellen DeGeneres surprised an athlete on her show. So that's the kind of stuff you get to see if you follow on social media. So it'll be probably the best part of your day a lot of days. And then also to get in touch with us, the contact page through our website, and then any questions, ideas, thoughts, my email address is just my first name, MEGHANM @usagames.org.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And I'm so honored to have you on today, Meghan. And we're doing this the day after 4th of July. So happy 245th birthday to the United States.
Yes.
And Meghan, how old is the Special Olympics now?
It's just over 50 years. They just celebrated their
50th year.
Yep.
Yeah, I know that they just celebrated. I thought that was so cool. They celebrated 50 years. So.
Yeah, and they celebrated it in Chicago, where Eunice started it all at Soldier Field, which was actually the first World Games was in Chicago at Soldier Field.
It's amazing. It has been a very important part for my family. Special Olympics has been a gift to my family. And then you take this, well, you have 4,300 athletes coming. You take this, the amount of lives that have been touched by Special Olympics. This is an organization we all need to continue to support. We need to follow them on social media. We need to reshare what they're doing. We need to donate, because I just speaking from experience, this changed my daughter's life. It made her a better person. It socialized her. It gave her more friends. And I loved that there are things like cheerleaders. She was so proud to be a cheerleader, and she competed with all the other cheerleaders. And I'll say this one thing. I remember the first time that the Special Olympics cheerleaders were competing. The other cheerleaders supported them in a way that every single person in the audience was crying.
Yeah,
everybody was crying because it was so beautiful. I love your work, and I love the work, what you're doing and the athletes. And so let's all get behind them and make the U.S. Games the best games ever.
Yes.
So very exciting. So one more time, tell us the website.
It's 2022usagames.org.
Yes. So we'll turn up the volume, and good luck, Meghan. So thank you
so much. Yeah.
You've been listening to Human Potential at Work, brought to you by Rue Global Impact. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you consume your audio. To learn more about Rue Global Impact and the services we provide, visit rueglobal.com. To learn more about how you can become a sponsor of Human Potential at Work, email David at rueglobal.com. That's David at rueglobal.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back next time with a new episode.